What's going on, everyone? I am just a typical, average American here today to react to this video here called How Sweden is Becoming Russia's Worst Nightmare. So, to be honest, like most Americans, I don't know anything about Sweden's military, other than you guys make very, very good fighter jets, right? So, this actually surprised me a bit. It sounds like Sweden is becoming one of the countries that Russia really fears, which is very impressive. So, today, I really want to learn more about this. How Sweden is becoming Russia's worst nightmare. So, let's take a look.
Sweden has recently rebranded itself into something even more amazing, a nation that's not afraid to stand up to global tyranny or to challenge international bullies.
Okay.
Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the resulting shifts in global politics, Sweden is now stepping into a role that many people never expected of them. They are becoming one of the world's most prolific arms suppliers.
Oh, wow. I feel like we have so much pride and almost ego here in the United States around our military and our we want to be the best at having the biggest military and creating all the best military technology. So we really don't hear about stuff like this, like the amazing things like that Sweden is doing with this stuff. So I had no idea Sweden was doing this.
But it goes much deeper than that. In many cases, Sweden is currently outperforming even much larger nations in providing certain categories of critical military aid to Ukraine, with extensive support including long-range missiles, artillery shells, anti-aircraft defenses, and advanced reconnaissance systems.
Wow, because I did a video recently, somewhat recently, looking at the Sweden Gripen, like a fighter jet, and how it's just as good, if not better, than the American F-35. So that was really surprising. So Sweden has a lot more going on for it in terms of military technology, and also this how much Sweden is helping Ukraine or fighting against Russia. I didn't know about any of that either.
To some, this is a surprising move. For the past 2 centuries, Sweden has had a strong reputation for neutrality, something that has been a defining feature of its foreign policy since the Napoleonic Wars.
Oh, I actually didn't know that. So historically, Sweden has been very neutral. But I mean, from what I'm hearing here about helping Ukraine and fighting Russia, it's not very neutral anymore. But from an American perspective, this is great. This is amazing what Sweden is doing. That's great.
And a deeply ingrained part of Swedish national identity. Vladimir Putin's aggression has apparently been the push Sweden needed, bringing them over the edge and convincing them to abandon their historical neutrality and join the NATO alliance, while simultaneously providing lethal support to Ukraine, the opposite of what Russia likely expected. And Sweden's aid to Ukraine has been far from just symbolic.
Oh, interesting. So this probably comes as a big surprise to Russia, because Sweden has been neutral for a lot of history, and now you're taking such a hard stance in supporting Ukraine. Maybe Russia wasn't expecting that move from Sweden. So that's awesome. Anybody who helps Ukraine, fights against Russia, that's awesome. That's great.
While they're a relatively small nation, their support has been incredibly meaningful and has played a big part in changing the tide of the war. Sweden's latest aid package alone is massive, worth over $1.2 billion, It includes artillery shells, surface-to-air missiles, and infantry fighting vehicles.
Oh my god. I didn't know Sweden was like even doing all this for Ukraine, to be honest. As you can tell, like this is just not stuff you hear about here in the United States. Like any of this. We don't even like to really talk about Ukraine anymore. Especially since like Donald Trump became president. Like and he has taken away basically all of the US support for Ukraine. And of course, like famously is much too friendly to Putin and Russia. And so yeah, this is something we don't even really like to talk about. Like America was very supportive of Ukraine at the beginning, but now it's like it's totally moved on and we've totally forgotten about it, which is really sad.
All designed to pack a punch and tip the scales in Ukraine's favor. Before the war, people might have expected Swedish support to come mostly in the form of humanitarian aid, but that just isn't the case. Every day on Ukrainian battlefields, Swedish tech is being used to eliminate Russian soldiers, protecting
No
Ukrainian
kidding.
cities and military positions, while simultaneously making it harder and harder for Russia to accomplish their military and geopolitical objectives.
Yeah, I just didn't know this was something that Sweden specialized in, that you had all this to offer.
And as Russia has tried to capture further territory from Ukraine, Sweden's weapons have been some of the most punishing in the entire conflict. But what's
Really?
perhaps the most impressive thing about Sweden's actions is how much they've been willing to put their own country at personal risk in order to defend Ukraine's sovereignty, despite the fact that they themselves owe Ukraine nothing. Like every
What?
other nation providing aid to Ukraine, Sweden was threatened by Russia with severe consequences if they got involved. These threats ranged from economic retaliation to thinly veiled threats of potential military or even nuclear aggression.
Oh my god, like this is just so again, like I've already said it. Like Americans we don't think about stuff like this. Especially like Sweden. Sweden is pretty close to Russia, right? And you're much closer to Ukraine than we are as well. Here in the United States, we fall into this same way of thinking of over and over. We just think, ah, Ukraine, Russia, that's so far away. That doesn't really affect us. We feel like that we're untouchable because we're far away geographically. Whereas Sweden, you guys like this so we have a totally different attitude. Like we don't take it seriously because of that. Seriously. And I know that sounds very harsh, like and it is. And it's probably a stupid way of thinking, but for Sweden and a lot of European countries, you guys have to take this very seriously because you're right there. You really could be attacked by Russia, or this war is right next to you. So it's very real. Here in the US, a lot of Americans it doesn't even feel real. It's just something we hear about. For you guys, you actually see it. So it's just a totally different. So I think it's good, like for me, for Americans to see stuff like this and understand this is very real. This is very serious. And this is one of the reasons Sweden got involved, because it's very real to you.
But unlike many other nations, Sweden did not let Russia's threats terrify them into inaction, despite the fact that they live right on Russia's doorstep and
Yes.
probably have more legitimate cause to be worried than most,
Yes.
aside from Finland and the Baltic states of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, who notably
Oh my god. Look how close you are. We just can't relate to this. Yeah. So I have a lot of respect for you guys for this.
are also doing their fair share in standing up to Russia despite immense personal risk. But our topic today is Sweden, and it's notable that if Russia were ever to actually follow through on some of its intense threats, Sweden is one of the few nations that Russia might actually be able to retaliate against. But this still hasn't stopped Sweden.
Exactly. Like Sweden, you are vulnerable. Like you're right geographically. Like you're right there. You're right next door. So this is scary for you in a way that Americans don't think about. Like it's not scary in the same way for us. So it's a different perspective.
Sweden, after all, sits well within striking range of the Russian Air Force, and also shares the Baltic Sea with Russia, sitting just a short distance from both of the ports housing one of Russia's primary naval fleets. And even
Oh,
though NATO would certainly support Sweden if they were attacked, and the conflict would ultimately almost certainly end in Russia's defeat, the land of Sweden itself and its surrounding seas would likely become one of the big battlegrounds if a full-out conflict between NATO and Russia were ever to erupt.
oh my
Even more,
God.
Sweden is a small country with a population that is far outnumbered by Russia, who is nearly 14 times Sweden's size. So for Sweden, the risk of bearing the cost of a broader conflict with Russia is real, even if they ultimately won that conflict.
But maybe this is one of the reasons Sweden is so passionate about helping Ukraine. Because Sweden, you guys can relate to Ukraine. You can relate. Like, that could be you. Like, what's happening to Ukraine in some twisted world, that could happen to Sweden, maybe. So I think that's why you guys show so much support and empathy. So that makes a lot of sense.
If they wanted to, Sweden could easily justify an action in the name of self-preservation and
That's
not
true.
provoking Russia.
That's true. That's true. You guys could do nothing and hope you're left alone. So it's very admirable that you're doing this.
As other nations have, and nobody would blame them. But that's not what Sweden has done. They have not cowered down. Despite the apparent risk, Sweden has not only been willing to provide aid to Ukraine to fight back against Russia, but it's gone further with that aid than most. For
Oh,
example, some other countries, like the United States, which are geographically distant from any potential Russian retaliation, have been hesitant to allow Ukraine to use the weapons they provide to strike Russian military targets on Russian territory. The fear is that doing this could provoke a broader conflict, so usage of weapons has often been limited to targets within Ukrainian territory only, forcing the Ukrainian people to bear the brunt of basically the entire war.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like that we're so concerned about that we are like what we are one of the safest allies, one of the safest NATO members. Like geographically, we're far from Europe, and yet we have so many stipulations. Like, oh, don't shoot Russia with our missile. Don't do it in their territory, or they might get mad at us. Like we're very concerned about that, and it's kind of like it's a bit embarrassing because it shows how reluctant we are to help, how reluctant we are to show Russia that we don't agree with them, right? So, yeah, this is stuff we do not like to acknowledge here in the US. We don't like to talk about this, but it's important.
But Sweden, right across the pond from Russia, who would be some of the actual ones in danger if a broader conflict did erupt, has not provided such restrictions. According to many foreign politicians, this should be seen as a reckless move. But Sweden has the right to make its own decisions. And as a nation with a long history of dealing with Russian rhetoric that spans hundreds of years, Sweden has a good sense of when Russia is telling the truth and when they're just bluffing to try to scare people into giving them their way.
I did not know that Sweden and Russia had such a history, like a lot of conflict by the sound of it. Yeah, we don't really learn about any of that in school here in the US. So I didn't know about that history.
So Sweden has allowed Ukraine to use their weapons against Russian military targets on Russian territory, a strategic calculation aimed at hastening the end of the war, and thereby saving countless Ukrainian and Russian lives.
Good for you guys. Seriously.
That's a good thing, because Ukraine's inability to fire on military targets in Russian territory has hurt them greatly, and has definitely contributed to this war dragging on and becoming more costly for both sides. On
Sure.
several occasions, for example, this situation has allowed Russia to mass large concentrations of troops right on Ukraine's border to prepare assaults on Ukrainian cities, without Ukraine being able to effectively fire back upon them, even
Wow, I didn't realize how much America's decision, like how much we are restricting Ukraine. Like a lot of Americans were getting mad that we're sending too much aid, too much help, too many missiles or whatever. Like we were doing too much for Ukraine. But we were really, if we were sending help, we were putting a lot of restrictions on it. Like not being able to shoot Russian forces on Russian territory. Like they're saying here, how Russia could just get as close as possible to Ukraine, but not technically in Ukraine. And Ukraine couldn't use American military attacks on these Russian forces. Like I've never thought about what restraint that is, like how bad that is for Ukraine. Even though we like to talk about how much we help, how much America has done for Ukraine, like it's this shows a whole different side of it.
Even though they can see exactly what Russia is doing. And this same tactical situation for a long time has allowed Russian military planes to bomb Ukrainian cities with impunity, operating from bases that were well within range of Western weapons that Ukraine was not allowed to use to strike them. This has put Ukraine at a tactical disadvantage that originates not from strategy or capability,
Wow.
but from politics, a key indicator as to why Russia still sees the international political realm as one of its primary wartime battlefields. It's almost as if Russia is directly taunting the West to expose their leadership's lack of willpower. But while many of Ukraine's large Western allies were content to sit back and watch all this happen, for Sweden, enough was enough, and they helped lead the charge in giving Ukraine permission to do what they needed to do. By allowing Ukraine
Good.
to use their weapons to strike targets within Russia, Sweden is sending a clear message. The days of appeasement are over, and any threat to European stability will be met with decisive action.
I mean, Russia is literally attacking Ukraine. Russia has no problem attacking Ukraine, bombing Ukraine, killing Ukrainians in Ukraine, and we're not letting Ukraine fight back in a way, like with the American military supplies that we've given. So thank God for Sweden, like just being logical about this and taking the handcuffs off of Ukraine. Like I didn't know about that. Wow, that's really disappointing for us.
And Sweden's bravery, combined with their ability to provide superior technology, has made a very meaningful difference for hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian lives. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look now specifically at what Sweden has brought to the table in support of Ukraine. And to understand why this aid is so significant at a strategic and tactical level, we first need just a basic understanding of how the war in Ukraine is being fought. The war in
Okay.
Ukraine has often been dubbed as the world's first drone war, highlighting the importance of sophisticated technology on the battlefield.
I've heard a little bit about this. How there's so much drone warfare going on with the Russia-Ukraine war, which is fascinating but also terrifying. Like like how this is the first war where like robots are flying around killing people. Like it's terrifying to think of it like that. Like especially if you get like AI involved or it's like it sounds like a movie, you know? Like machines flying around, bombing and killing people, and that's how modern war is going to be. It's very scary, but just the facts of what modern technology looks like, it's just how it is now.
But seemingly paradoxically, it is also a war that is largely still being decided by a particularly old weapon, artillery, where victory
Oh.
is often determined largely by the amount of ammunition you have available to spare. For Ukraine to continue
Okay.
to mount a defense against Russia, they need to continue to operate at a world-class level on both the drone and artillery fronts,
Sure.
and Sweden is doing its part to ensure that they can do so to the best of their ability, while also supporting Ukraine in other critical areas.
Okay.
Let's take a look specifically at artillery first, where Sweden has helped to fill key gaps. Artillery is of critical importance, because while having a sufficient supply of artillery shells doesn't guarantee that Ukraine can win the conflict, not having enough could guarantee a loss.
Yeah, this is not only teaching me about Sweden, and your contributions, but also about Ukraine and what's going on and how this war is being fought. Like, yeah, I've already said this is just stuff we don't really hear about in the United States.
Both sides currently rely heavily on sustained artillery bombardments to weaken enemy positions, and for Ukraine, sustained artillery firepower is especially essential when it comes to halting Russian advances and preventing Russian forces from gaining additional footholds in strategic areas.
Well, thank God for Sweden supplying like what sounds like very critical things for Ukraine to have any chance here.
More than that, the ability to maintain a consistent supply of artillery shells is crucial for Ukraine's strategy of attrition, where Ukraine holds defensive positions and punishes the Russian army over time by forcing them to take massive losses if they want to continue pushing forward.
I see.
It's a strategy that's working, and could almost certainly be successful in the long run, provided that Ukraine remains armed with adequate supplies. The problem is that Russia often outperforms Ukraine in sheer volume of artillery shells, giving them the ability to generally fire around 10,000 per day, where Ukraine has only been able to fire around 2,000 per day in return, leaving some of their soldiers inadequately covered.
Yeah, it's just like when you hear that, like 10,000 artillery strikes every day, like it makes it very real. That's a big problem we have in the US, that we don't realize how gruesome and real and visceral this is.
Ukraine's Western partners, generally speaking, have struggled to keep pace with these production demands, and this is where Sweden has come in a critical way. Sweden has been a major partner in supplying Ukraine with 155mm artillery shells, ensuring that they can sustain their artillery operations throughout the conflict.
Wow.
Alone, they haven't been able to fill all of Ukraine's needs, but Sweden's timely provision of artillery shells played a crucial role in helping push Ukraine's stockpile to healthy enough levels for them to keep fighting until at least 2025.
Because if you just heard, like, if all you heard was like, oh, Sweden gave Ukraine some artillery ammo, it'd be like, okay, so you need to understand how incredibly important and how tactically important these artillery, having the ammo to utilize this defensive strategy, how important that is for Ukraine's survival. So Sweden is really contributing where it matters.
This kept Ukraine in the fight for the short term, but more critically, it also bought Ukraine the time it needed to finish its own artillery manufacturing facilities, which will now allow Ukraine to fill much of their own shortfall going forward.
So Sweden doesn't even have to do this forever. They're just helping Ukraine survive long enough to get these production facilities online. So I'm sure Ukraine is incredibly thankful to Sweden. I had no idea you were doing so much for Ukraine.
These new Ukrainian facilities could mean that artillery shortages become a thing of the past for the remainder of the war, which is exceptional news for all Ukrainian soldiers. But they couldn't have gotten here without the support of nations like Sweden. Artillery has hardly been Sweden's only contribution to this war, though. Not by a long shot. They've also provided critical aid in the more technological side of this war. One of Sweden's most significant contributions has been state-of-the-art anti-air systems, like the RBS-70. This is a man-portable air defense system, or MANPADS, that is highly effective at targeting low-flying aircraft, such as drones and helicopters.
Oh my god. This really, like, for me, I don't know a ton about this kind of thing. This really does seem like from a video game. Like, as stupid as that sounds, this is amazing technology that Sweden is providing. Like, and so important with, again, fighting against the drones or aircraft, or this is, I know maybe this is inappropriate to say, but like, this is like really cool. Like, this is a really cool thing that Sweden is doing for Ukraine, and very important.
Providing Ukraine with much needed capabilities to defend its airspace, and limiting Russia's ability to conduct air assaults with impunity. Critically, the RBS-70 is laser guided and can operate in conditions that counter electronic warfare or thermal traps, and that has made all the difference for Ukraine in several cases. The RBS-70 has significantly reduced the impact of things like helicopter attacks, along with the drone swarms that Ukrainian cities are often forced to suffer through.
Oh my god, this is insane technology that Sweden is providing. And also, like, even just the threat of having this seems to discourage certain Russian attacks. Like, it's awesome how the artillery ammo and this anti-aircraft rocket launcher, like, they're awesome and they are saving so many Ukrainian lives.
And even the mere presence of the RBS 70 serves as a deterrent in many cases,
Right?
preventing Russia from assaulting certain targets in the first place.
Right.
In a similar category, Sweden has also recently provided Ukraine with 2 airborne early warning and control aircraft, or AWACS. These AWACS planes are some of Sweden's most prized assets, and giving
Oh.
them up to Ukraine marks a calculated risk for the Swedish military.
I had I had no idea Sweden was giving so much to Ukraine. Like, this is a lot.
But Sweden's Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, has framed it as a necessary step. Better to stop Russia far from home than to have to face an emboldened Putin closer to Sweden's own borders.
That is true. Like, strategically speaking, this all also is of benefit to Sweden because Sweden would probably rather help Ukraine take down Russia than have any chance of this becoming like a Sweden directly versus Russia war. So it also makes sense, like from Sweden's point of view, why you would do all this.
The AWACS planes are particularly important as Russia is increasingly relying on drone and missile strikes to target Ukrainian infrastructure and military assets. The airborne early warning aircraft will help Ukrainian forces track Russian activity more effectively, providing a strategic edge by allowing them to detect and track Russian aircraft, drones, and missile launches over a wide area.
So Sweden only has so many of these things. These are like really valuable, expensive. These like use radar and tracking, which is going to give Ukraine so much more intelligence and information about where Russian forces are. This sounds incredibly important.
Ultimately improving both air defense coordination and preemptive strike capabilities, and helping them support ground operations with real-time intelligence. And
Yes.
speaking of ground operations, Sweden is also providing tangible on-the-ground support to Ukraine as well. Notably, Sweden has donated its entire fleet of PVV 302 infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine.
S- Sweden, it sounds like, has literally done like some of the most that any country has done for Ukraine. I know there's a lot of countries that are trying to help Ukraine, which is amazing. I don't know if I've heard of any country who's done like this much, especially in terms of giving not just money, but like literally military assets, like the tracking airplanes and all the ammo and the tanks, and this is a lot. This is a lot. Like, respect. Seriously, respect.
And in a world where some of the largest nations are beginning to back down and acquiesce to Russia, Sweden's stance is a breath of fresh air, providing hope that Russian tyranny may, in fact, not last forever. For
Yeah.
decades, Russia has relied on the idea that European nations would be too divided or too cautious to stand up to its aggression. But now, Sweden, a nation of just 10 million people that is 14 times smaller than Russia, is proving that they're not afraid of Russia's big talk.
Seriously. I also did not realize how huge of a statement and how important this statement is. Like, Sweden is making a big statement just by doing all this, not just in empowering Ukraine, but by agreeing to do all this, making a big statement to Russia, like that you're not afraid and that Ukraine has allies who are willing to help them, which is so important to also encourage others to be as brave as Sweden.
That said, Sweden has good reason not to worry about Russia because their geographical positioning and military capabilities at home give them far more advantages than many people give them credit for. For more on Sweden's military capabilities,
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's the end. So that was amazing. I didn't know any of this stuff about Ukraine, Russia, Sweden, how much Sweden is doing? Like, unbelievable. So, my respect has really gone up for Sweden. You're helping Ukraine so much, which is obviously the right thing to do, and also fighting against Russia, which is the right thing to do. And also, indirectly, doing what's best for Sweden and your safety as well, which is also the right thing to do. So it sounds like you guys totally have command over this situation. You're making all these great decisions, and most Americans have no idea. I had no idea. So this was great. Oh my God. So, anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment, especially if you're Swedish and you know about this, you have thoughts about this, that'd be really cool to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.